first speaker at this session is Roberto Tarazona Ponte. We're very happy to have him here, very proud to have him here. He is Vatican's representative for social activities in Latin America. He is stationed in Peru, and he will tell about the important work that they're doing there. Mr. Tarazona does not speak English, so he will be interpreted by Piero Ponce, who is also a speaker later today in the program. Please, the floor is yours.
Señoras y señores, participantes en este Foro Mundial contra las Drogas, reciban mis saludos.
I greet you, ladies and gentlemen, attending this third World Forum Against Drugs.
Permítanme compartir con ustedes una breve reflexión que he titulado Construir la esperanza contra toda desesperanza que la droga produce.
I would like to share with you some reflections regarding the topic of bringing hope against the hopelessness left by drugs.
Mi presentación tiene tres momentos. La primera, el hombre llamado a vivir en el amor.
My presentation has three parts. The first one is man, a being called upon to live in love.
Una segunda, una sociedad que necesita curar sus propias heridas.
The second one being a society that needs to heal its own wounds.
Y un tercer momento, hacia una sola familia humana.
And a third one, towards a single human family.
Permítanme comenzar.
I will begin.
Toda persona humana está llamada a vivir en el amor.
Every human being is called to live in love.
Su existencia camina inexorablemente hacia este destino.
Its existence leads inexorably towards this destiny.
Y es a la vez su aspiración más profunda.
And is at the same time its deepest aspiration.
En la concreción personal e histórica de esta vocación encuentra su propia realización.
In his personal and historical comprehensions of this vocation, he finds his own realization.
Así como la base más sólida para el ordenamiento de la convivencia humana y de la sociedad en su conjunto.
As well as a more solid foundation for the organization of human coexistence and of society as a whole.
El hombre tiene la necesidad de construir comunidad.
The man has the need to construct community.
Llámese familia, vecindario, sociedad o país, donde toda persona sea reconocida y valorada como un ser único, digno y valioso para todos.
Either within the family, community, society or country, where everyone is recognized and valued as a unique being.
Esto brota de la conciencia y de la propia naturaleza del ser humano.
This comes from the consciousness and nature of human being.
El hombre existe en el encuentro, en la entrega, en la solidaridad, en el don.
Man exists in meeting, in the delivering, the solidarity, in the desire to give.
Está llamado a tejer redes de diálogo y de comunión, de apoyo e impulso vital. Esta dinámica ontológica constituye una necesidad tan imperiosa como el mismo hecho de respirar.
Its need for supporting communities is a very imperious need for coming with this vision.
Esta realidad del humano configura un itinerario que debe necesariamente que transitar y frente al cual debe dar cuenta a su propia conciencia y a su condición humana.
This reality of the human being is a path that needs to be trodden, a task and a responsibility that answers to his own conscience and human condition.
El Papa Juan Pablo II nos señalaba con claridad y firmeza que el hombre no puede existir sin amar.
Pope John Paul II strongly expressed that man cannot live without love.
Él permanece para sí como un ser incomprensible. Su vida está privada de sentido si no se le revela el amor, si no se encuentra con el amor, si no lo experimenta y lo hace propio, si no participa en él vivamente.
He remains to himself an incomprehensible being. His life is senseless if love is not revealed to him, if he does not encounter love, if he does not experience it and make it his own, if he does not participate intimately in it.
Es indudable que todos los hombres perciben el impulso interior de amar de manera auténtica, y el amor y la verdad nunca los abandonan.
It is of no doubt that all people perceive this inner impulse to love in an authentic way. Love and trust never leave him completely.
El hombre es un ser en permanente búsqueda de algo o de alguien que pueda dar respuesta a los enormes y profundos interrogantes que habitan en su interioridad.
Human being today is a being that is in permanent search of something or someone who will give him the answers to the huge and profound uncertainties and aspirations found within himself.
Las ansias de felicidad que tiene todo ser humano necesitan ser atendidas y resueltas. Difícilmente el mundo podrá, por tanto, dar al hombre el sentido último de su existencia. Ayudémosle a que tenga razones para vivir y podrá enfrentar cualquier desgracia, incluyendo la adicción a las drogas.
The anxiousness for happiness that all men have need to be given and solved. The world will then and probably give them the last sense of his or her existence. Let's help them to realize the reasons to live and to confront any disgrace, including the addictions to drugs.
Debemos reafirmar que el drama de la cultura actual es la falta de interioridad, la ausencia de contemplación.
The drama of the current culture is in fact the lack of inwardness, the absence of reflection.
Existe la tentación de vivir desde una idea perversa de libertad que impide reconocer la propia dignidad y el valor de toda vida humana.
There is a tendency to live under a perverse conception of freedom that prevents the acknowledgement of our own dignity and the value of any human life.
Sin interioridad, la cultura carece de entrañas. Como nos dijera su santidad Juan Pablo II, es como un cuerpo que aún no ha encontrado todavía su alma.
Without inwardness, culture lacks heart. Beatified John Paul II taught us that a heartless culture is like a body that is still to find its soul.
Sin interioridad, el hombre posmoderno pone en peligro su misma integridad, su presente y su viabilidad histórica.
Without inwardness, postmodern man endangers his own integrity, his present and his historical viability.
La droga no es el principal problema del adicto. El consumo de la droga es solo una respuesta falaz a la falta del sentido positivo de la vida y de una profunda soledad.
Narcotics are not the drug dependence main problem. Drug consumption is simply a fallacious response to loneliness and a negative sense in life.
Expresa la ruptura y el fracaso de un proyecto personal, de la propia valoración, de la inconsistencia y la fragilidad de modelos familiares y sociales que no pueden evitar que sus integrantes se suiciden consumiendo las drogas.
It expresses the rupture and failure of a personal life project, of personal worth, of the inconsistencies and fragility of a familial and social model that cannot prevent its members from committing suicide through the consumption of drugs.
Con frecuencia, la drogadicción es consecuencia de un vacío interior que lleva a la desesperación. Por eso, la complejidad de la problemática de las drogas no se vence solo desde las drogas, sino que es necesaria una amplia acción de prevención que sustituya la cultura de la muerte por una cultura de vida.
Frequently, drugs are the consequence of an inner void that leads to desperation. This is why the complex problem of drugs cannot be conquered with drugs. Rather, a broad prevention spectrum is required to substitute a culture of death with a culture for life.
La droga daña y mutila lo más excelso de la creación, al ser humano. Por ello, nuestros esfuerzos deben estar encaminados al descubrimiento o redescubrimiento de la propia dignidad del hombre y ayudarlo a resurgir y crecer como un sujeto activo mediante una confiada reactivación de los mecanismos de la voluntad y orientada hacia seguros y nobles ideales.
Drugs damage and mutilate the most sublime of creations, the human being. Therefore, our efforts should be steered towards the discovery or rediscovery of man's own dignity to help him to reemerge and grow, but activating those resources that drugs have buried, and by the constant reactivation of the mechanisms of free will that are oriented towards safe and noble ideals.
Hacia una sociedad que necesita curar sus propias heridas.
Towards a society that needs to heal its own wounds.
Nuestra sociedad está enferma del espíritu porque sus miembros tienen dificultad para reconocer en la otra persona a un miembro de la misma sociedad, a un miembro de la familia humana, con los mismos derechos y deberes. Está herida de muerte en su proyecto de vida social.
The spirit of our societies is ill because its members have difficulties recognizing in other human beings a member of its own society and of the human family with the same rights and duties, who is wounded to death in his social life project.
Vivimos un cambio de época cuyo nivel más profundo es el cultural. Se desvanece la concepción integral del ser humano, su relación con el mundo y con lo trascendente.
We live in an era of change, and its deepest level is the cultural one. The integral conception of the human being is dispelling as is his relationship with the world and with the transcendent.
Una de sus principales características es la sobrevaloración y sobredimensión de la subjetividad individual.
One of the main characteristics is the overvaluation and overdimensioning of the individual subjectivity.
Se vive un individualismo que debilita los vínculos comunitarios y propone una radical transformación de entender lo humano y la construcción de las relaciones interpersonales.
We are living an individualism that weakens community bonds and proposes a radical transformation of the understanding of humans and of the construction of interpersonal relationships.
Se deja de lado la preocupación por el bien común para dar paso a la realización inmediata de los deseos del individuo, a la creación de nuevos y muchas veces arbitrarios y derechos individuales, como por ejemplo la legalización de las drogas.
We leave aside our concern for a common good to give way to the immediate realization of our wishes, to the creation of new and many times arbitrary individual rights, such as the legalization of narcotic drugs.
Estamos inmersos en una crisis de sentido, donde se nos hace más difícil percibir la unidad de todos los fragmentos dispersos de la propia vida o la dinámica social.
We are immersed in a crisis of senses, when it becomes ever so difficult to perceive the unity of all the dispersed fragments of our life or of the social dynamics.
El ser humano necesita un conjunto de significados fundamentales, verdades sobre sí mismo y lo existente, desde donde orientarse y conducir la propia existencia y el orden de la sociedad.
Human beings need a cluster of fundamental meanings, truth about oneself, and existing from where to orient their own existence and organize society.
Sin duda, son los jóvenes el grupo poblacional en el que mejor y más dramáticamente se reflejan estas profundas mutaciones y contradicciones.
It is undoubtedly among the youngsters that these profound mutations and contradictions are more dramatically reflected.
La problemática de las drogas destruye la interioridad de las personas.
Drug destroys the inwardness of a drug user.
Las personas que la consumen y compromete seriamente su proyecto de vida, conmociona todo su entorno familiar y social y atenta contra la propia nación, que se ve invadida con la droga como una especie de cáncer que invade el tejido social e institucional.
It seriously compromises his project of life, it shakes up the familial and social environments, and it threatens the nation as it is invaded by a sort of cancer that infects the social and institutional networks.
La problemática del drogodependiente nos afecta a todos. En la droga, todos somos víctimas y todos somos responsables.
The problems of the drug users affects us all, and just as we are victims, we are also responsible.
De allí la necesidad de enfoques integrales en la prevención, la atención y la rehabilitación, tanto de los consumidores como de las familias y del entorno social, y así como políticas nacionales e internacionales que enfrenten con valentía a los que trafican y fomentan esta cultura de muerte.
This is why we need comprehensive approaches in prevention, treatment, and rehabilitation, both for consumers and for their families and their social surroundings. We also need national and international policies that will courageously confront all those who traffic drugs and who promote a culture of death.
De hecho, la droga no entra en la vida de una persona y de la sociedad con un rostro de degradación y de muerte, sino como una realidad atrayente y con promesas de felicidad y de evasión.
In fact, drugs do not enter the life of a person and of society displaying a face of degradation and death, but rather as an attractive reality that promises happiness and evasion.
Estas semillas echan raíces en una cultura que lo permite todo, incluso que sus miembros puedan sucumbir ante este flagelo.
These seeds take root in a culture that allows everything, even for its members to succumb to this plague.
Nos conmueve e indigna sobre todo la realidad de los menores de edad, obligados a convertirse primero en comercializadores de la droga, luego en consumidores, llegando inclusive por mafias criminales a la explotación sexual.
It is of our concern and indignation the reality of minors obliged to force to become first drug dealers and later consumers, and sometimes they are even sexually exploited by criminal mobs.
Asimismo, la mujer drogodependiente, que a diferencia del hombre, es dañada en lo más profundo de su identidad y dignidad de mujer, sobre todo si es madre o ante la posibilidad de engendrar una vida inocente. La realidad del HIV-Sida camina de la mano con la realidad de las drogas.
Furthermore, a woman dependent on drugs, unlike men, are deeply hurt in their identity and dignity, especially when they are mothers or when faced with the possibility of procreation innocent lives. HIV/AIDS is a reality that goes hand in hand with drug addiction.
El consumo de la droga confina al que la consume en una suerte de adolescencia interminable. Genera una renuncia injustificada e irracional a pensar, de querer actuar como personas racionales e inteligentes, anula la propia voluntad y genera nuevas formas de esclavitud humana.
Drug consumption confines the user into a sort of unending adolescence. Irrationally and injustifiably, users give up thinking or wanting to act as rational and intelligent persons. Drug consumption overrides the will of the people and generates new forms of human slavery.
Fundamentalmente, el drogodependiente es un enfermo de amor. No ha conocido el amor, no sabe amor en el modo justo que lo hace libre, porque no ha sido amado de manera humana, porque no se ha encontrado con el amor.
Fundamentally, drug dependents are lovesick. They have not experienced love. They do not know how to love in a way that sets them free because they have not been loved in a humanly manner, because they have not met love.
Tenemos que señalar con firmeza que las drogas atentan contra la vida. No se puede hablar de libertad de drogarse ni el derecho a la droga, porque el ser humano no tiene derecho a dañarse a sí mismo, ni puede abdicar nunca de la dignidad personal que le viene otorgada por Dios.
We must firmly state that drugs are life-threatening. We cannot talk about the freedom to get high or the right to access drugs, because a human being does not have the right to harm himself, and he cannot nor should he ever give up the personal dignity that God granted him.
¿Qué tipo de sociedad estamos construyendo y ofreciendo a nuestros jóvenes, quienes prefieren lanzarse al vacío de las drogas antes que habitar en ellas?
What type of society are we building and giving to our youngsters when they would rather jump into the void of drugs than live in them?
¿Qué intereses económicos y a veces políticos construyen caminos plagados de sufrimiento, de pobreza humana y muerte?
What economic and sometimes political interests are building paths plagued with suffering, human poverty, and death?
Al contemplar la realidad de los drogodependientes, el Papa Juan Pablo II nos recordaba un pasaje del Evangelio de San Lucas donde un hombre es asaltado por unos malhechores y dejado medio muerto en el camino a Jericó.
When watching the reality of drug dependence, Pope John Paul II used to bring on memory the passage of St. Luke's Gospel, whereas a man was mugged by some criminals, robbed, and left half dead in the middle of the road to Jericho.
Nos decía, estas personas van como en camino, buscando algo en lo que creer para vivir, tropiezan en el camino con los mercaderes de la muerte que les asaltan con la lisonja de libertades ilusorias y de falsas perspectivas de felicidad. Estas víctimas son hombres y mujeres que se encuentran desgraciadamente despojados de los valores más preciados, profundamente heridos en el cuerpo y en el espíritu, violados en la intimidad de la conciencia y ofendidos sin su dignidad de personas. En realidad, en estas situaciones, las razones que llevan a abandonar a cualquier esperanza podrían parecer fuertes, aunque somos conscientes de esto. Sin embargo, existen razones para esperar.
He said, "These people seem to be on their way, searching for something to believe in, to live for. However, they stumble upon the traders of death, who assault them by flattering them with misleading freedoms and false expectations of happiness. These victims are men and women who unfortunately have been stripped of their most precious values, having been deeply hurt in body and soul, violated in the most intimate part of their consciousness, and whose dignity has been offended. In fact, under these simple circumstances, the reasons that led to the abandonment of any hope will seem strong, and even though we are aware of this, there are still many reasons to continue in hope."
Somos conscientes que el mundo y nuestro tiempo necesita una profunda renovación cultural y el descubrimiento de valores de fondo sobre los cuales construir un futuro mejor, nos recordaba el Papa Benedicto XVI.
Towards a single human family, we are conscious that today's world needs a profound cultural renovation and the rediscovery of background values over which we can build a better future, as reminded by His Holiness Pope Benedict XVI.
En fidelidad al Dios de la vida, la Iglesia ha señalado con firmeza que no puede permanecer indiferente ante este flagelo que destruye a la humanidad, especialmente a las nuevas generaciones. Su labor se dirige especialmente en tres direcciones: la prevención, acompañamiento y sostén de políticas gubernamentales para reprimir esta pandemia.
In fidelity to God of life, the Church has firmly stated that it cannot remain indifferent before this scourge that is destroying humanity, but especially the newer and younger generations. Its task is steered in three directions: prevention, support, and sustainability of governmental policies to contain this pandemic.
En la prevención, insiste en la educación, en los valores que deben conducir las nuevas generaciones, especialmente en el valor de la vida y del amor, la propia responsabilidad y la dignidad humana.
Prevention insists in the provision of education and values to the younger generations, like the value of life and love, responsibility, and human dignity.
En el acompañamiento, la Iglesia está al lado del drogadicto para ayudarle a recuperar su dignidad, venciendo esta enfermedad y promoviendo su reinserción social. En el apoyo a la erradicación de la droga, no deja de denunciar la criminalidad sin nombre de los narcotraficantes, traficantes de la muerte, que comercian con tantas vidas humanas, teniendo como meta el lucro y la fuerza de sus más bajas expresiones.
Under support, the Church is close to the drug dependent to help him recover its dignity, overcoming the disease and promoting his social reinsertion. By supporting the eradication of drugs, it also condemns and accuses the nameless criminality of drug traffickers, traffickers of death, who trade with the lives of so many people and whose sole purpose is to make a monetary profit and to gain power.
Se debe de revalorar la importancia de la fe como un factor de protección y recuperación para el drogadicto y dar los medios necesarios para que estas iniciativas se conozcan y se desarrollen.
We need to revalue the importance of faith as a protection and recovery factor for the drug user that can provide the means necessary to implement these initiatives.
Ante la realidad de las drogas, reafirmamos una vez más el valor supremo de cada hombre y de cada mujer en su dignidad. Por ello, es fundamental proteger y fortalecer a las familias, patrimonio de la humanidad, escuela del más rico humanismo, que constituye uno de los tesoros más importantes de los pueblos latinoamericanos y del mundo entero.
Faced with this rock reality, we reaffirm once again the supreme value of every man and every woman. Therefore, it is fundamental to protect and strengthen the family, a heritage of humanity, the school of the richest humanity, that is one of the most cherished treasures among Latin American peoples and the rest of the world.
La familia es uno de los primeros lugares de prevención contra la droga. Ella ha sido y es escuela de la fe, palestra de valores humanos y cívicos, hogar en que la vida humana nace y se acoge generosa y responsablemente.
The family is one of the first places where drugs can be prevented. It has always been and continues to be the school of faith, the forefront of human and civilian values, and the home where human life begins and is generously and responsibly embraced.
El desafío es grande. Se trata de construir la esperanza donde todo parece perdido. Entre todos, debemos fortalecer un tejido social que consolide una cultura de la vida, caracterizada por una inquebrantable pasión por lo humano.
We are facing an enormous challenge. We are talking about providing hope where everything seems to be lost. Everyone must reinforce the social network so as to consolidate a culture for life, characterized by an unbreakable passion for humanity.
Es fundamental la participación sinérgica y solidaria de toda la sociedad, de los estados, los organismos de cooperación, las empresas privadas, el mundo académico, las iglesias y los hombres y mujeres de buena voluntad.
It is fundamental the participation with synergy and solidarity within the entire society, the states, cooperation agencies, private businesses, all the churches, men and women of goodwill.
Así como las organizaciones de familias y personas afectadas por las drogas, para que en todos los ámbitos sociales exista una contundente opción por la vida fundada en la dignidad de la persona, el respeto irrestricto de los derechos humanos y el desarrollo humano integral.
As well as the organizations formed by families and individuals affected by drug problems is both necessary and essential, so that every social setting might have an overwhelming option for life based on the dignity of the person, on the unrestricted respect of human rights and an integral human development.
Invitamos a todos los asistentes a este foro en renovar su fe inquebrantable por el ser humano, en sus capacidades innatas de sobrevivir en la adversidad, en la grandeza de su ser y de su existencia, en la sorprendente capacidad de amar y de amarse.
We ask all the attendants here today to renew their indestructible faith in the human being, in its innate capability to survive the adverse, in the greatness of the being and its existence, and its surpassing ability to love and be loved.
Con la fuerza que nos viene del Evangelio de Jesucristo, aportamos una esperanza contra toda desesperanza. Renovamos nuestro deseo de estar al servicio de la sociedad en su conjunto para comprometernos con nuestros hermanos que sufren de la pandemia de la droga, porque la Iglesia se siente íntima y realmente solidaria con ellos y sus familias, porque todo lo humano encuentra eco en su corazón. Muchas gracias.
With the power given to us by the gospel of Jesus Christ, we offer hope where there is none. We renew our desire to be at the service of society, committing selflessly to our brothers who are suffering the pandemic of drugs, because every human finds an echo in the heart of the church. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And then I will give the floor to Mr. Viktor Ivanov from Russia. He is Director for Federal Narcotic Service of Russia, and he was in 2008 appointed as Director of Russia's Federal Service for the Control of Narcotics and Chairman of the State Anti-Narcotics Committee. Please, the floor is yours.
dear forum organizers, participants, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to thank Your Majesty for the invitation to the forum and for a brilliant speech in the opening of the forum. It's impossible to overestimate the role of the World Forum, which nowadays has undoubtedly become a force to consolidate the world community, to form a global anti-drug agenda, and to oppose the global threat of drug legalization and the rejection of the basic anti-drug convention developed over the past 100 years. For the past year, we can actually observe a burst of legalization initiatives. The proposal to solve the problem quickly is made by presidents of individual countries, Guatemala, for instance, like it was a month ago by a former director of the British intelligence service, MI6. It's more than illustrative that so-called Global Drug Politics Commission, which directly promotes drug legalization, last year hit upon the idea to present its definitely provocating and favoring drug legalization report on the 1st of June, on the International Children's Day. No doubt, this large-scale and highly aggressive PR campaign on drug propaganda is directly or indirectly related to enormous drug business income, estimated by experts as $600 billion United States dollars per year. The mentioned report should be unambiguously regarded as a kind of manifest of drug legalization supporters. We compare the report of the so-called Global Commission and the declaration of the World Forum 2008, we will see two absolutely opposite positions, two incompatible doctrines between which a keen and mirrorless fight is building up. The objective of drug legalization supporters is to legalize transnational organized crime, a global criminal international, to make drug trafficking smooth and comfortable. Their primary task is to break international unity in terms of protection of all international law secured in the United Nations Profile Conventions. Meanwhile, activities of legalization supporters are perfectly organized. Thus, for the past 3 years, the number of sites which support drug legalization, without taking into account global direct web networks, at least doubled. It's also becoming evident that one is trying to make Latin America, where several countries of that particular region are initiating significant concessions to drug legalization supporters, a locomotive of the global drug legalization movement. It's indicated that the Latin American Commission for Drug and Democracy Concerns, which actually sticks to legalization objectives, became a pilot project and transformed into the above-mentioned Global Commission for Drug Politics. Probably, if I may say so, to transfer know-how from the Western Hemisphere to the Eastern realm, idem est to the whole world. Its highly dangerous tendency in our forum must unambiguously express our negative opinion of it. We are obviously facing a perfectly organized, generously paid, deeply defended and propagandized drug front, and our obligation is to oppose it and to set up our own global anti-drug front. I believe that the declaration of the First World Forum Against Drugs 2008 very precisely defined drug addiction as a modern form of slavery. In the beginning of the 21st century and of the third millennium, we must prevent the recognition of slavery as a normal phenomenon. We must advocate the matter of freedom, truly democratic values in all those who are against the return of slavery. In this situation, it seems present and expedient to set up a community of friends of the United Nations Anti-Drug Convention under the World Forum. I kindly ask you, dear participants in this forum, to give support to my proposal. Today, the United Nations Anti-Drug Convention are a kind of major quarantine activities against the epidemic of global drug addiction specified by an unprecedented in the world history scope of the drug business and formation of classical, paradigmatic, in fact, two global drug production centers, and appropriate drug trafficking. As far back as in 1998, the founder of Swedish anti-drug model, an outstanding thinker, organizer, and enthusiast, Niels Beirut, wrote that humanity, fighting against drug addiction epidemics, will be probably decisive for survival of contemporary legal and welfare states. Development towards further drug abuse will inevitably result in disintegration of society and chaos. At the same time, experts and public leaders on anti-drug politics realized that beside the protection of long-term achievements in drug combating, it's necessary nowadays to intensively develop a new anti-drug model of activities, since along with sweeping changes in societies and social life principles, the very nature of drug addiction and drug crime has drastically changed in the world. So today we have to deal with fundamentally new challenges and threats for both individuals, countries, regions, and the world and international security on the whole. Let me briefly outline the main threats and immediately offer a package of 5 principled solutions. Side 1. Firstly, it's necessary to introduce a new notion of anti-drug security to the international and national security system, a notion that will be able to reproduce appropriate instruments against the actually new threat, even as crime of globalization based on sustainable and long-term operation of 2 global drug production centers. In South America is one, in the Western Hemisphere, and the Afghan one in the Eastern Hemisphere, as well as on respective drug trafficking. It is them that have created and have been supporting the totally globe entangling network of drug transit, which corrupts economic and political processes in terms of growing crime and violence. For that very reason, there is a great need in essential resolutions of the United Nations Security Council, beyond validity of which we would be actually disarmed against drug addiction globalization as an induced global epidemic. It is necessary to revise our attitude to the phenomenon of Afghan drug production, which has lately exceeded mere drug growing and production and has turned into a predominant factor of global financial and economic crisis, as well as of the international situation in general. At this moment, I'd like to call your attention to one outrageous fact. A group of experts in toxicology, headed by a prominent professor of the University of Florida, Dr. Bruce Goldberger, made a statement that the current generation of Afghan children is doomed, since all of them are typical opium and heroin addicts. The scientists have registered unprecedentedly high drug level of drugs in children's blood. Hazardous concentration of drugs are contained not only in the smoke of adult smokers, whose number exceeded 1 million a long time ago, but also in clothing, beddings, carpets, furniture, as well as in breast milk of nursing mothers. It is registered that of those children don't get a drug, they begin to suffer from the withdrawal syndrome. Thus, a 10-year-old girl's hair sample contained 5,600 picogram per milligram of a heroin metabolite, 8,300 picogram per milligram of morphine, and 46 picogram per milligram of codeine, corresponding to parameters of a medically diagnosed adult drug addict. No comment here. Dear colleagues, it's high time to qualify Afghan drug production as a threat to international peace and security as per Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter. Secondly, we need anti-drug diplomacy as a principally new national and international activity. Let me emphasize once again the role of our World Forum, which has become a kind of headquarters of non-governmental anti-drug diplomacy. I would deem it timely and very important to arrange an anti-drug summit of the leading countries of the world. Thirdly, global anti-drug politics should be based on the fact that drug production has become an indispensable component of the shadow financial system, which is generating a deadly global crisis. The mounting global financial and economic crisis and a speculative and parasitic economy are directly linked to criminal drug income, since such black drug money lets a number of big banks cope with liquidity shortages that are lethal for them. To prevent the crisis from escalating to catastrophe, we must knock the financial basis out of it by liquidating global drug production centers. Slide 3, please. Fourthly, it's time to focus on organization and methods of social rehabilitation and resocialization. Drug addiction is nearly the main stimulant of social and anthropological degradation of societies and human capital undermining. The world should combine all advanced theories and methods of human existence renaissance via multiple social politics, organizing the reproduction and development of national and transnational positive communities. I suggest organizing a special conference on new methods of social rehabilitations and resocialization under auspices of the World Forum. Fifthly, it's necessary to resolutely supplement the most important measures of police repression, drug prevention, and drug addicts rehabilitation with a stake on alternative development. It's obvious nowadays that alternative development is the best primary prevention of drug production. In this context, we'd like to welcome from this tribune the Peruvian president's decision to hold an anti-drug forum in late June in Lima, which will focus on alternative development as well as an expert conference in the same place in November. It's through alternative development that one of the key human rights, the right for development, is enjoyed. The right for development is a fundamental United Nations right stipulated in the Declaration of the Right for Development, which has adopted by Resolution 42/128 dated December 4, 1986 of the General Assembly, and is secured by the set of measures promoting social progress and development on the basis of the Declaration of Social Progress and Development proclaimed by Resolution 2542 dated December 11, 1969 of the General Assembly. It seems necessary to consolidate around the alternative development problem and exercise of the right for development, which is not just systematically undermined by the drug abuse, but where drug abuse itself is in fact an integral spawn of non-development. Today we can see how powerful our anti-drug front is, and we should pass to victories over drugs, to resolutely reject decadent moods and conciliation with the drug mafia's initiative. We shall do it. Thank you.
And now it's my pleasure and honor to invite Mr. R. Gil Karlikowski from Washington, United States of America, to take the floor. He's the Director of National Office of Drug Control Policy, and he was nominated by President Obama and confirmed by the US Senate as Director of the Office of National Control of Drug Policy when President Obama took office. Mr. Karlikowski coordinates all aspects of federal drug control programs and implementation of the President's National Drug Control Strategy. And he brings nearly 4 decades of law enforcement and drug policy experience to his position. And I think it's amazing that this is the 3rd forum Mr. Karlikowski will attend, and we are so happy for that. Welcome up, Mr. Karlikowski.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's a great honor and pleasure to be with all of you again. And in particular, I certainly want to thank the government of Sweden, Her Royal Majesty, but also all of the hard work that Mr. Larson and her staff have put into this. And then certainly the World Federation Against Drugs. Well, it is a unique honor to be among you. This is, as I think almost every speaker has said, a very critical time in the global debate on drug policy. And it's very fitting that we're gathered here in Sweden. And I had some of that history of the great Swedish drug epidemic and have had the opportunity to look at the professor's book. And you know from Dr. DuPont's statement this morning the history and the legacy and actually the lessons that have been learned. So I think I'll pass through that and move on to, I think, Sweden's experience with drug liberalization, I think, is just as poignant and just as important today. Over the past few years, we've watched this debate, in particular in the United States, lurch between two extremes. On the one hand are people who suggest that drug legalization is a silver bullet, the solution to drug control. Well, we don't have to guess how that would turn out, and the lessons of a laissez-faire approach to drug laws in Sweden here have not been forgotten on all of us. On the other hand, there are people who believe that we have to have a war on drugs and that we, with a law enforcement-centric mentality, that will win out. The truth is, in my belief, neither of these approaches is humane, effective, or grounded in evidence. That's why the Obama administration supports this third way approach to drug control, one that's based on the results of a huge investment in research that Dr. DuPont mentioned this morning from some of the world's preeminent scholars on disease and substance abuse. And it's so fitting that we continue to gather in a global way to discuss and exchange that information and to learn from each other. And I think the benefits of all of you being here over the next several days will just spread throughout the world. We believe in the efficacy of this third way approach because we believe that balanced drug strategies such as those in Sweden have really accomplished much for the countries that have implemented them. In the United States, we've made significant progress, and oftentimes that progress never gets printed in the press or shown in the local news. Particularly, for instance, let me give you the example of cocaine. According to our National Survey on Drug Use and Health, the current rate of cocaine use in the United States has declined by 40% in 5 years. This is an unprecedented reduction in overall cocaine use has been accompanied also by the lower rates of cocaine use among young people, significant declines in the number of arrestees who have tested positive for cocaine in the United States cities, and historic reductions in the rates of adults testing positive for cocaine in the workplace testing and in those programs where they have to go through that in order to get, for example, a commercial driver's license or other types of testing as a result of the unique occupation that they hold. I think those are really progressive steps. But let me tell you what I think is the more important part, and that's the new data from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention show that there's been a 42% reduction in the number of cocaine overdoses in the United States. Well, that really means that less people are dying from cocaine overdoses. That really means that we're also saving significant costs as our very busy emergency departments in many cities actually then do not have to deal with as many cocaine overdoses as they had often seen. Well, on the global level, the fact that we're gathered here and learning from each other is really an achievement in and of itself, and we owe a real debt of gratitude to WFAD for, again, bringing us together. You might guess they don't have a huge staff. It's done by a very few dedicated, very hardworking people, many of whom are in the room, but also because I think they are emboldened and feel so supported by so many people here, and we're proud to stand with them. Well, this growing knowledge has helped millions of citizens around the world to overcome their substance abuse disorder. I've visited treatment centers all over the world, and particularly as I travel throughout the United States. And when I listen to people who have recovered from drugs and are back at home in their communities and taking care of their families, I think it really tells you how important that is. That's why in the Obama administration and in our office, the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, we've worked very hard to have an Office of Recovery to really trumpet and to show that people can and do recover from drug use. It's inspiring to walk during Recovery Month with literally thousands of people, whether it was 10,000 people crossing the Brooklyn Bridge or about 2,500 people in Kansas City, Missouri, who have all recovered and who are working hard at that recovery every day, and they're a great inspiration. You know, they have such courage to speak out about their own affliction with the disease of addiction, and then to have that courage to come out and tell others that they've not only overcome this, but they're people held in high esteem. In spite of the progress that we've made, though, this public debate on the policy continues to go back and forth between the extremes. That vocal, organized, and well-funded group of advocates who insist that legalization is a silver bullet, and that these are bold reforms. And on the other side of the debate, there are those who insist that the one-sided law enforcement-driven war on drugs approach is important. Filling jails with drug users, the logic goes, will at some point in the future just make the problem go away. I think Dr. DuPont could not have been more clear in his opening this morning in talking about the real game is in reducing our demand. Well, I'm going to be the first to say that in the United States, along with other countries, we have historically been too slow to build out our public health infrastructure and really to bring public health into the forefront on this issue and to ensure that evidence-based prevention programs and early intervention, treatment and recovery services are available to all of the many people who need them. Over the past decade, there has been an explosion of very useful and timely research behind drug addiction and treatment effectiveness. And based on this knowledge, the Obama administration is working hard to expand and at the same time evaluate and improve health services. Last month, we released the President's third National Drug Control Strategy that pursues this third way for our nation to approach drug control. It emphasizes prevention and treatment while employing the criminal justice system to divert nonviolent drug offenders into treatment instead of incarceration. And already over the past 3 years, we've spent more on drug prevention and treatment than we have on United States drug law enforcement and incarceration. That often is lost with many of the people who say we're not spending and putting enough emphasis into the treatment and prevention area. And with the passage of our National Healthcare Reform Act, we'll be requiring the healthcare industry to treat substance use disorders the same way they would other chronic diseases, providing a revolutionary boost to our work to intervene early before drug use ever becomes an expensive and costly criminal justice problem. And still, we must do more. We must back up our advocacy for public health interventions by developing sufficient capacity and devoting more resources to helping the people that are in need. The United States and other developed countries must not only provide the health services to citizens, but we have to help our international partners develop their own demand reduction capacities. Our nation is responsible for funding about 80 to 85% of the world's research on drug use, and we can and will do more to share that information with our partners. And of course, we have long provided assistance to those partners in the area of drug interdiction, an important component. Law enforcement, drug crop eradication, these are all programs that will continue to receive the support of the United States. And in fact, we're working with these international partners in drug source and transit nations to update and improve international law enforcement and supply reduction programs. We must look also at ways to expand the sharing of demand reduction best practices, technical and professional exchanges, and the capacity to build programs. That's why I'm so pleased to be here and continue on from here in Stockholm to St. Petersburg, Russia, to continue the work that for 3 years Director Ivanov and his staff and our staff have done in a truly collaborative and bilateral way to work on the issues of drug problems in both our countries. Well, as part of our effort to promote drug policies for the 21st century, we're releasing a new document also today, and that's the Principles of Modern Drug Policy. It explains in very straightforward language what we stand for. What does this third way actually mean? And it rejects the false choice between an enforcement-centric war on drugs and the extreme notion of drug legalization. The document lays out an approach that recognizes the continuing role of the UN conventions. in their current form. They are a solid basis for the development of new, evidence-based and modern approaches to reducing drug use and its consequences in the 21st century. And I hope you find the document of use and will share it with your friends and your colleagues. The document is attached to the full printed copy of this speech, and it has 10 principles, the cover of the full spectrum of drug issues. I'd like to discuss briefly 4 of those principles. We must ensure balanced, compassionate, and humane drug policies. Modern drug policies must acknowledge that addiction is a chronic disease of the brain that can be prevented and treated. Public health and public safety initiatives are complementary, and they're equally vital to achieving reductions in drug use and its consequences. The drug policy challenge facing the world today is not a choice between those 2 extremes that I've talked about. There should be no doubt that helping those with substance use disorders break free from addiction is compassionate and it is humane. And maintaining legal restrictions on drugs is fundamental to public health approach to reducing the disease of addiction. Our approach aims to prevent the onset of drug use while at the same time providing access to health services. And we must protect human rights. Respect for human rights is an integral part of drug policy, and citizens, especially children, particularly children, have the right to be safe from illegal drug use and the associated crime and violence and other consequences, whether it's within their family or in the community. When drug-involved offenders have contact with the criminal justice system, they deserve to be supervised with respect for their basic human rights and to be provided with the services to treat their underlying substance use disorder. And by reducing drug use, we're protecting human rights for our citizens, and particularly those children. At the same time, we have to be careful not to make ourselves vulnerable to the charge of violating the human rights of those whose substance use has brought them under criminal justice supervision. All those who have that substance use disorder should receive evidence-based treatment services, whether in prison or on probation. We must be extremely careful not to confuse punishment with treatment. There's no evidence to suggest that imprisonment helps address the substance use disorders, and in no case should prison or the involuntary confinement of those arrested on drug charges be equated with evidence-based drug treatment. Such approaches need to be phased out and replaced by modern, research-validated practices. Well, next, we must work to reduce drug use to reduce drug consequences. And there are consequences to drug use, although not often portrayed in the popular media. Well, the best way to reduce the substantial harms associated with drugs is to reduce the drug use itself. Public health services for drug users, including HIV interventions for people who inject drugs, should be implemented in the context of a comprehensive, recovery-oriented public health system that also provides drug users access to treatment for their addiction. Policies and programs that increase or sustain harm, such as injection rooms and drug legalization, should and must be opposed because they would not lead to decreases in drug use or its consequences. We should support research on various methods of treatment, including the use of medication-assisted therapies. We should recognize that it may take some time and several relapses for those struggling with a substance use disorder to firmly establish their recovery. Nevertheless, we cannot lose sight of the fact that the purpose of public health interventions for those with these disorders is to end drug use. Any policies or programs that accept permanent drug dependence should be opposed. And this opposition is grounded in the recognition that addiction is a disease and the belief that we cannot give up on individuals struggling with substance use disorders. And lastly, we should reform criminal justice systems to support both public health and public safety. Criminal justice systems play a vital role in breaking the cycle of drug use, crime, incarceration, and rearrest. In my career, something I have seen just all too frequently. And while individuals should be held responsible for breaking the law, the criminal justice system should help bring them into contact with treatment services if they are suffering from substance use disorder. And this includes providing treatment services in correctional facilities, providing alternatives to incarceration such as drug courts and nonviolent drug-involved offenders who have benefited tremendously from the now over 2,600 drug courts in the United States. and using monitoring, drug testing, and other means to ensure recovery from illegal drug use. The criminal justice system is a vital component of anti-drug efforts, and it must be deployed smartly. I've spent my career in law enforcement prior to serving as President Obama's drug policy advisor, so it's essential that we make a very clear distinction between those whose criminal acts are driven by drug addiction, even if they are involved in drug sales, and those that are significant criminals. The first group must be directed into supervised treatment so their underlying addictions can be addressed. And we've seen examples of this around the country in which they are under supervision. It is less costly, the interventions actually work, and they still are, and the communities still are very safe communities. But the second group, well, they must face justice. Professionals in law enforcement know the difference between those hardened criminals and those violent gang leaders and those that have been drawn into criminal activity by their substance use problems. We must be very careful and not lump the two groups together. As I've discussed reform issues with colleagues around the world, it's become clear that nations do not have sufficient alternatives to incarceration available to them. And to put these programs in place, significant policy and legal changes have to be made. The United States is eager to provide technical assistance where we can on this issue. We are seeing these reforms at every level of government, city, county, state, and federal government. And together we can move forward, increasing the availability to all countries of effective alternatives to incarceration. Well, those were just 4 of the 10 principles, and I hope that you take a minute to look at our full document and can find a way to make it of use to you. And I recognize that it is going to require a long-term, sustained, serious effort to ensure that truth prevails in the global drug policy debate. Agenda-driven advocates who stand in the way of science-based drug policies will always seek to undermine mainstream efforts to protect public health and safety. But we remain united, and we look forward to working with all of you to ensure that all of those struggling with substance use disorders receive the help they very desperately need while also protecting public safety. I thank you very much for your attention today, and I applaud you for the vital and important work that all of you do on this very critical issue. Thank you.
We are very happy at this forum to have a representative from the UK government. So that's, I'm so pleased to say very welcome to Mr. Gus Jasper, who is the Deputy Director at the Home Office in the United Kingdom. He leads the UK strategies on both drugs and alcohol, and he has worked in numerous roles in government, including the Home Office and on policy, on local policy. So, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It is a great pleasure to be here, and my first time at this forum, which is for me a great honour and a privilege. I took over post just at the end of last year, so I already feel very humbled by the collective experience, expertise and insights into this, in this room. Thank you very much for inviting me to join you. It is a fitting time this year as the 100th anniversary of the first drug conventions. As my wife told me this morning, early this morning on the phone, also my wedding anniversary, and for once I have an excuse not to be home on time. As the UK lead on drug strategy, covering our action across the whole of government, from prevention to treatment to enforcement, I thought I would talk a bit about our learning and our approach, some of the successes that we have had in the United Kingdom, and the challenges that still remain. But before I start, I should probably declare whether I think I am, and the policies I lead are, and in a sense whether all of us in this room are a failure or not. For there's been a lot of noise from some, which you'll be familiar with, about drugs policy having failed. Some asking us to give up and to legalise. So has our balanced drugs policy of control, alongside prevention and treatment, failed? Have we all failed in this room? Well, the evidence is telling its own story. Although we won't claim success when there is still so much harm from drugs, the numbers and evidence show encouraging signs of change. I think it's important we remember at this first day of the conference that the vast majority of people do not take drugs. In the United Kingdom, in England and Wales, we now have around the lowest recorded level of drug use in the adult population since our measurements began in 1996. We've also seen in adults a substantial fall in the use of cannabis, from 9.5% to 6.8%. And although in the long term an increase in cocaine, in the last year we've seen a significant reduction, and we're starting, we believe, to turn the tide even on cocaine. The scale of reduction among adults in the UK is also mirrored in younger adults, aged 16 to 24, where there have been significant reductions between 96 and 2010-11 in use of any drug, any Class A drug, and any stimulant drug. Even amongst our younger adults, the use of cannabis has fallen significantly in the last decade. And amongst school-aged children, drug use has also occurred. In 2010, 12% of all school children reported taking drugs in the last year. Still too high, still much too high. This is compared with 20% in 2001. Demand approaches, balanced approaches are working. We've also seen the first significant drop in estimates of the number of heroin and or crack cocaine users in England, and strong signs that young people are not starting to use heroin and crack cocaine to the same degree as previous generations. We've seen significant drops in the number of heroin and or crack cocaine users under the age of 35, and the number of young people aged 18 to 24 presenting to treatment for opiate use has almost halved in the last 5 to 6 years. So we believe actually the evidence is on our side. The approach is working, drugs use is down, but it is still too high, and I'm not going to claim success. Nor can I claim that we can link every intervention to every single result in the United Kingdom. But we should and do have a lot to contest this notion of failure. And I want to focus on what we think works, and believe we should focus the debate on the evidence and how we can do more of what works. So, behind these pleasing trends in the UK, what lies behind our approach? Well, I'm going to talk about 3 areas. Firstly, our drug strategy is firmly committed to a balanced approach, covering the supply of drugs, demand, and building recovery, supporting people towards a drug-free life. And we take the principle of shared responsibility seriously, both in reducing demand at home and supporting efforts overseas. Drugs use is a complex policy issue, and at its heart is about individuals and communities. Single policy responses will fail to address this complexity. The use of illegal drugs causes significant impact to the social and economic well-being of the United Kingdom. Our last estimate, which we are updating, puts the cost to the United Kingdom of the harm of the illegal drugs market at approximately £15.4 billion UK. To put this in context, this is more than our entire policing and security budget. And we know the vast majority of the public are actually on our side in controlling illicit drugs. Many people won't claim that, but actually we've surveyed the public, both in terms of not using drugs, but also on the acceptability of drugs in society. In the United Kingdom, in surveys, almost 2/3 of people thought it was never acceptable to take cannabis occasionally. Around 9 in 10 adults thought it was never acceptable to take cocaine. And the vast majority, 98%, thought it never acceptable to take heroin occasionally. Communities are very clear. They don't want to be blighted by the effects of drug misuse. We estimate that drug users commit about 1/3 to half of all acquisitive crime. That's burglary, theft, robbery. And our research says that treatment does work, and it reduces these wider societal costs. Our research shows that for every £1 spent on drug treatment, £2.50 is saved to society. So in the UK, we've expanded our treatment capacity on the basis of good evidence, and believe we're now seeing better outcomes than ever before. But this isn't an either-or of treatment or a criminal justice response. We are effectively using the criminal justice system to divert users into treatment. 30% of all of our treatment referrals come from the criminal justice system. And we know that there is no difference in user outcome between those referred by the treatment system, so when they're arrested, or by the criminal justice system when they're arrested, and those who are self-referred. They achieve the same outcomes regardless of their referral route. We have a drug intervention programme in the UK which looks for wider indicators and picks up those who are caught, say, for stealing and gets them into treatment. We have a set of trigger offences which everybody is mandatorily tested on if they commit one of these crimes. Getting these people into treatment, we estimate, reduces almost 680,000 crimes a year. The wider impact, 680,000 less victims a year. Rather than being at opposing ends of a policy debate, criminal justice and treatment interventions deliver positive outcomes together. And of course, our efforts to tackle drugs do not stop at the UK border. We're firmly committed to working with international partners to ensure the presence of tough and focused enforcement efforts to disrupt traffickers at source or in transit countries. We should remember drug traffickers are opportunists. They spot the gaps and they exploit them. We need to help each other to identify those gaps in capacity and to work together to address them. We've had a great deal of success, but more is needed. And the key to unlocking that success is global collaborative cooperation. Our second area is a shift and a fundamental ambition shift towards recovery. This is a fundamental shift in ambition and one that we will continue to build on. We have a well-developed treatment system and we've had some success in harm reduction. But we are changing the system to focus on actually achieving recovery, getting people into a drug-free life. We changed the commissioning models for our entire treatment system to incentivise people, to incentivise the providers to support people to become free of dependence rather than continue to pay for dependence or continue to pay for failure. We're piloting new models of paying providers by the results so that treatment providers will only get the full funding if they achieve success tackling the user's dependency, stopping their offending, improving their health. We're also looking at taking this to ensure that they get the person into work and also into suitable housing. And our latest findings show promise. Recent findings from our National Treatment Agency show that there's been a jump in the number of people completing treatment successfully, that's free of dependence, so drug-free, by 18% in the last year and 150% over the last 5-6 years. And we've seen a fall in the number of people entering treatment as well, so not re-entering. And we believe this is due to less demand for services rather than lack of access to services. The average wait for treatment in the UK is only about 5 days. So our third critical part of our argument is about evidence and data. And we've invested a lot in evidence and data in the UK to help us understand our policy context and help us understand where we need to go and what our interventions should be. We are developing for the first time an evaluation framework across our whole drug strategy, which will set out our evidence base and the gaps where better evaluation is required. Crucially though, it will help us assess the effectiveness and value for money of our drug strategy. We have lots of evidence that says what works, not so much that says it works and costs this much and we can afford it in these straitened budget times. We want to build that evidence base even further. I'd encourage us all to work together as we build our evidence base, and we'd happily share our findings as we go forward. In a sense, wouldn't it be great if we could focus the global debate on drugs, on building and using our evidence to reduce demand and reduce the harm from drugs, rather than polarised policy argument? So, we're starting to turn the tide on drug use, but we need to ensure we keep ahead of new challenges. And just to end on one of these challenges, the United Kingdom has seen, along with many other countries, a new and emerging phenomenon: the rapid increase in the availability of a wide variety of new psychoactive substances, mostly synthetic drugs. They are often referred to as legal highs, but we should be clear that these are drugs, some with known harms, but more often with unknown harms. I think as an international community, we must improve our messaging on these substances and the way we convey the risks and the legality to the public, and in particular young people. We cannot simply say that legal means safe and illegal means harmful. These substances came to prominence in the mid-1990s, but the issue has now intensified quite dramatically, particularly with the use of the internet as a tool for the sale of these drugs. The UK has seen more and more of these drugs coming onto the market. Few have taken hold, but they can spread rapidly. I'll give just one example. Mephedrone, that's mephedrone, not methadone, the prescription alternative. Mephedrone, as one of these new synthetic drugs, in just a matter of a few years in the UK, has become the second most popular drug amongst under 24-year-olds. So it's overtaken cocaine, it's just behind cannabis. We've taken action against these. We've brought in new generic drug legislation to try to control them, and we've taken action against the internet trade. We've shut down 120 websites that are openly selling some of these drugs. And we brought in new legislation. That means within days we can now outlaw or control a new substance. Last month we used this legislation for a new drug, methoxetamine, which is an analogue of ketamine. And we made this into a temporary class drug, literally in a matter of a few days after receiving reports of deaths linked to this drug and concerns from our hospital emergency departments. So last week we published our own new psychoactive substance action plan. It draws on a balanced approach, adapting it for these new substances. But we want to keep working and work at an international level for how we can help tackle these substances. And at the United Nations recently, we co-led a new resolution to encourage the international community to tackle the threat of these new substances, and I ask that we all work together on them. So in summary, we believe we've made some positive steps and have had some success. And we should positively counter the notion of failure. But we still have a long way to go. We've just published our priorities for the drug strategy this year, and we'd like to learn from others and discuss approaches. In the UK, fewer people are taking drugs, more drug users are recovering from addiction, fewer need treatment, and more are getting over their addiction quickly. But this is not about passing or failing. It is not a choice between legalisation and harsh punishments, or even between harm reduction and recovery. This is about protecting the public from the harm of drugs and supporting those that do misuse drugs to recover from their dependence and lead a drug-free life. In essence, what we're all leading on is the two most critical elements of government responsibility: protecting its citizens from harm and enabling all to contribute to society. We have a lot still to achieve, and I look forward to listening and working with you all in the future. Thank you very much.